Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It's me, Joey P. Joe Pizzapia. That, of course, is Dinger Dan Harris. That's right. I brought over his old baseball nickname because it's just me and him today. And it's you, of course, joining us all the time here on Fantasy Pros. And today's show is very important because it's about those players, whether or not they're worthy to stash on your roster, drop them back in the pile, or maybe even pick up potentially after your draft. These are the guys on the fringes of your fantasy rosters that could make a positive impact, at least in the first month of the season, perhaps beyond. We're also going to get to some of your listener mailbag questions as we go. Dan Harris, this has been an incredible weekend of drafting. I can't believe how busy our Discord channel has been, and if you haven't joined already, run to fantasypros.com/chat to join our Discord conversation. We've been grading drafts. I only grade them typically in GIF format, and sometimes not all that well because, of course, I'm Joey P. I gotta stay on brand. But Dan Harris, it's amazing how busy this weekend has been and how many drafts are going on. It feels really good. It feels like the excitement's back for football.
Yeah, this was a big draft weekend. And yeah, we have a Rate My Team channel on our Discord. Again, fantasypros.com/chat. And I going to put it like conservatively at 150 pings like of my name, because you can ping me. I get a notification, be like, Dan, rate my team. So I was running out of gifts. I was running out of superlatives. But what I like about it is that it felt like a lot of people sort of were sticking to the Fantasy Pros brand. A lot of people were going with guys that we have recommended. So there were a lot of good grades given out. But yeah, this weekend it was popping in Discord. Yeah. It was really good to see. And I know we're in this weird mode right now, Joe. And like we're going to talk about, it's like we're coming to the very, very tail end of draft season. And then we've got to go into week one. So I'm like caught in between where I'm still like tweaking my draft, process. And I'm also starting my week one process. So it's a weird time over here.
It is a weird time, but it's an exciting one, and I feel like much different vibe than last year. I feel like last year was more cautious, hesitant. This year, I feel like we're just in it. Like, we're jumping. It's like, yeah, let's go. Football's here. We know we're going to have a full season no matter what. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah. Like, I still say that, and I still kind of go, oh my goodness, fingers crossed, right? But it really does feel so much differently than even last year. I was still very bullish that the season was going to happen. We were going to get through it because football really had a good plan in place, and they only played once a week, so I thought it was more manageable. But this year feels much more like it has in the past, and I think from that sense, it just feels good to be back. And of course, make sure that you are back in the groove every single day with Dan Harris's fun show, The Kickoff. And if you haven't already subscribed to it, what are you waiting for? Please, wherever you get your podcast, check out Dan Harris on The Kickoff. Weekdays, it's 15 minutes, which is about the limit I think most people can take of you, Dan, right? I would imagine like 15 Fair. Is good, right?
About that, yep.
About 15, right? So you get the news, the notes, you get all the analysis, all that fun stuff. Dan makes fun of us when we're not around. I can only assume, right? Okay. So you get all that 15 minutes. You can do it on your, your walk, at in the morning before work. You can listen to it on your train ride, your car ride, however you get to work, or maybe just at home, like you're just waiting for the, bus for the kids or something like that in the morning. Just pop in Dan Harris. That's all you need. And while you're at it too, I want to remind everybody, in September, we have a new giveaway thanks to our friends at Pristine Auctions. So head over to fantasypros.com/contest. Again, that's fantasypros.com/contest. We got the Kyler Murray autograph football. That is one for the trophy case. All you got to do is make a review of the show over on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. Screenshot that. Go to fantasypros.com/contest. Upload it. And don't forget, you can get a 3x entry by subscribing to our YouTube channel, which is well over 100,000 subscribers now. Brilliant. I love saying that out loud.
111, man. 111.
Woo-wee. I love it, baby.
To the moon.
YouTube.com/fantasypros. Again, youtube.com/fantasypros. Subscribe there to the YouTube channel and make sure you get that into your entry for the contest to get that Kyler Murray football, which is a pretty cool thing thanks to Pristine Auctions. So, Dan, these are very important guys because in shallow leagues especially, these names are floating around the waiver wire that we're going to talk about today. In deeper leagues that might still be drafting today, tomorrow, the next couple days before the season starts, these are names you should be aware of, and we're going to break them down position by position and kind of tell you whether or not we should stash them or drop them. Before we do, one or two notes also I just want to talk about. Saquon Barkley, they say he's unlikely to have the full workload, but he is going to play week one, so that's very positive. Your thoughts on Barkley here? I mean, this is the kind of guy that doesn't have to touch the football a million times to have a good fantasy day, but there is a weird schedule thing for people looking ahead to week 2 where they do play on the Thursday night. So it's no surprise that the workload's going to be managed a little bit here, at least in these first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I talked about it a lot actually on the kickoff from this morning for the Monday morning's kickoff, because that's where everybody's questions are, right? What do I do with Saquon? I will start with, obviously, this is not a surprise. We kind of saw this coming in. Dr. Chow said a couple of weeks ago when we had him on the podcast, and again, we're still going to be doing that every Friday with Dr. Chow in season. He did not expect Barkley to be 100% close to it or get a full workload by week 1. That's just not the way things were trending. Now, if Saquon Barkley plays, you're starting him, okay? Because even if he's on a limited snap count, which I expect, even if he's not 100%, he can always have that explosive game. So my very, very, very early rankings for
How
week
early?
1. Very. Again,
Okay.
I usually have like my very final by tomorrow, so I'll get there then. Then it'll be my very early final rankings. I have him at 13 at RB. So that's a guy who you're starting lower than you generally will. And I think, by the way, if you draft Saquon, who to me, Joe, I don't know where you ended up with him in draft season. I had dropped him to 15th over my 9th running back, but basically the tier down from the Chubb, Eckler sort of thing where I was taking wide receiver. So he was 15th for me. He's a guy who you build in a slower start, generally speaking, and you hope by maybe the second quarter of the season, he really starts getting going. But you are starting him. It makes sense. They're going to bring him along slowly and probably max out at 15 touches.
Yeah, I would be starting him, absolutely. And as far as me getting shares of him, the further he dropped, the more enticing it was because I could immediately back it up with another running back. And I'm trying not to be short-sighted. I'm trying to look at the season as a long season. I've got many, many weeks. Now, as long as Saquon Barkley is deemed healthy enough to play week 1, that was good enough for me, and it seemed like things were trending in that direction. So I'd rather have Saquon Barkley, those, last 10 weeks of the season really be Saquon Barkley, and I'm willing to start off a little slower. But if I was going to reach as a top 5 pick for Saquon, that's where I struggled because you didn't need to put that on your roster. That's where I fell. So if he fell in drafts, I was willing to take him. If he didn't, I was willing to, obviously let other people have him at 4 or 5, which really you didn't see too much of that. It was more of the drop, which is a great value because he's one of the few guys, Dan, that could finish top 3.
Yeah, especially this weekend when I saw drafts, when I saw people posting their drafts. He was a guy who I saw going like later half of the second round. People are now officially scared off. And look, I understand the hesitation with taking him as a first round pick because I have that hesitation as well because I think there's a realistic scenario here where that offensive line is terrible, right? That's why when people are talking about Devontae Booker, I'm like, I don't really care because if it's not Saquon Barkley running behind like that terrible of an offensive line, I just don't want the running back because it's going to be grotesque. Barkley at his peak, he can survive any offensive line, so it doesn't really matter. But I do think that the hesitation with him is warranted. At the same time, Joe, you mentioned it, there is almost nobody, especially in that range, who's going to have his upside if he deems himself healthy, even by week 3 or week 4. Don't forget what this guy can do. So he's worth the risk for me in kind of the early to mid-second round. But yeah, I have moved off him as the first rounder. I agree with that.
One other quick note, good news for the Cowboys, Dak Prescott is cleared to play, so that is expected. Bad news, though, they're going to be without the right guard, Zach Martin. He tested positive for COVID, so he's not going to play in Thursday's opener. Also, Brandon Knight is also out. He was a close contact as a backup offensive lineman. Collins has a neck questionable. Josh Ball and the ankle injury is on IR. So they've got a lot of issues right now on this offensive line in Dallas, so it's just something to keep in mind as you're looking at matchups and potential, because they're going against a very good defense, especially that front of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this could be a tough first game back there for Dak Prescott and this offense. Potentially, you never know who steps up there, but offensive line matters. And when you see these kind of injuries, especially with a quarterback you're trying to protect, it's not the way the Cowboys want to start off things.
Yeah, Martin is their best offensive lineman. So that is a giant loss. And again, this is something with the Cowboys, I feel like every year it's like, oh man, their offensive line is so good, and then they just deal with all the injuries. The bottom line is this: does it lower my opinion of pretty much everybody on that offense? Yeah, it does, because you're crazy if not. Offensive line is a huge issue, especially when it comes to the spread. You're going to see the spread, by the way, continue to move up in favor of the Bucs for sure. But you're starting Dak. You're starting Zeke.
Oh, of course you are.
You're starting the wide receivers. Right? There's nothing actionable about this and everything like that. But I would say, okay, this first game, might not go that perfectly for everybody on the Cowboys, and just try not to freak out if it goes poorly. Because again, that's a ferocious defense. You lose your best offensive lineman. That's going to be tough. But long term, Dak looks very totally healthy. This is kind of what we expected, and I moved him back. I'd moved him, Joe. I don't know about you. I'd moved him down to quarterback 6 behind Rodgers because I'd gotten a little worried just about the shoulder. I've moved him back up to 5. I feel totally fine with him.
Never moved him from 5 the entire time.
All right.
Stuck with him all the way through.
You're a stronger man. You're a stronger man than I am.
Well, it's
accurate, though, to be fair.
Accurate. All right, so let's get to the stash and drops and see and test our real will here and how strong we are mentally when it comes to some of these names. And let's start with the running backs. And we're going to start with a pair of Patriots here, which is nice alliteration and a fun way to start. J.J. Taylor, who has shades of a much stronger version, potentially, of like a Dion Lewis type back. And Rhamondre Stevenson, who looks like young LeGarrette Blount. So this is fascinating because this is what the Pats do. They have a style and they wish they want to do things, and they find players that fit those roles as the years go by. Same thing in that slot role that, you see Troy Brown in, and then Wes Welker in, and then Julian Edelman, and now maybe Jacoby Myers in. So it's fascinating to always see because you can always identify. Now, it can be a difficult backfield. We know this, Dan Harris. But when it comes to Taylor and Stevenson, let's take them one at a time. In PPR, if you're in a deeper league, Taylor is a little interesting to me because James White's another year older. I know last year was tough for him because obviously that tragedy with his folks. And I think mentally he wasn't quite there. But also he's another year older physically. And I wonder if you're going to see a little bit more Taylor than we realize in some of these game plans going forward.
First of all, I think that your opinion should matter on this more than mine because of you called the Mac Jones sort of starter. Now that Yates is not here, I can officially say great call by you, obviously. So perhaps you have a little more insight into the thinking of your favorite team, the Patriots. But here's what I will say. I like Taylor as a player. I think the way you described him is sort of a heftier, Dion Lewis, like that. That's a really good thing to do. But the bottom line is realistically, it's hard for me to see a path for him to provide value. Absent James White, you're right, getting injured or not, because they know what they have in James White. He is still a very, very serviceable third down back, so I do expect him to more factor in. I think you're going to probably need to take him out of the equation almost entirely for Taylor to have value. So he's not really a guy who I'm looking forward, even in PPR leagues, to necessarily stashing. Stevenson, though, I have a little bit more interest in. And again, not a ton. We're going to talk about some other guys today, I think, who I have more interest in, certainly as a stash. But he looks great this preseason, maybe the best of anybody in this entire preseason. But again, it's really hard to see him having a major role. Everybody loves Damian Harris, myself included. I'm very excited about him. James White is going to be the third down back at the very least. So it's not like Stevenson is a pass catcher or going to factor in that way. I think unless he just becomes the goal line back, which I don't really expect, Joe. Like, I don't think they're going to be like, Harris, get it down to the 3. Then we're bringing in Stevenson as a hammer, though maybe neither one of these guys is somebody who I'm really targeting in my drafts.
I'll say this. I think Stevenson in your standard formats has a lot of value because I do think he is going to get some opportunities around the goal line. Now, it might not be straight out of the gate. It might be something you also see potentially as the game goes on. You might see third quarter, fourth quarter, when defenses are a little bit more tired, you might start to see Stevenson, who is a bigger physical back than Harris. And especially on the goal line, that is going to be tough to stop. And I think when defenses get more, kind of the exhaustion sets in, you're going to see Stevenson. So he might get, 10 carries, maybe like 8 carries in a game. But if one of them's a touchdown to standard league, that's a flex play, especially in a 14-team league. So he's a guy that I think is worth having on a roster right now. And to a certain extent, because of the touchdown equity he brings, maybe even more. I'm with you on Taylor. I know Adam Rank is very high on him, and I understand why. But I think James White's still there. It's more of a monitor guy. Let's just wait and see how it goes. He might be an interesting guy, though, that we could be talking about sooner than later when bye weeks start popping, because he is somebody you could pluck off the waiver wire because the Pats have a late bye, or be maybe anticipatory of it. Maybe go a week ahead, just spend $1 instead of 5 or 6 the following week when people realize it, right? Be ahead of your bye weeks. Pick up a guy who's in a good matchup because potentially he could catch 4 or 5 balls, and he does have that explosiveness where he could rip off a big play. Let's get to, okay, yeah, something else to add?
I wanted to ask you, actually, because
sure.
Sometimes what I like to do, Joe, is I always feel like we as fantasy analysts, we talk about our thoughts on guys, but sometimes I know fantasy managers, they come in to be like, okay, well, what about X versus Y? So let me ask you a couple of guys that I have ranked right around Stevenson. I want to know if you were drafting today, or generally speaking, who you prefer.
And I've drafted Stevenson, just so everybody,
okay.
I got a couple shares.
My guess is you're going to have him higher than these guys, but these are the guys right around him in my draft rankings, okay? In half PPR again, Tony Jones Jr.
I would still go Jones because he's already. Okay. It's a 2-person share already.
Okay.
So Stevenson has more guys working in that rotation.
How about Damian Williams?
No, Stevenson.
Okay, just like that. All right. How about Tyson Williams?
Williams. I think Williams is gonna. I don't want to ruin everybody's Gus Edwards parade. I really don't. But Tyson Williams is gonna get more work than I think people realize. And Tyson Williams looked good in the preseason. Like he looked like one of these guys that kind of pops out of nowhere, like Philip Lindsay a couple years ago. We're all looking at each other and go, why weren't any of us on this? And I got a couple Tyson Williams shares. The only J.J. Taylor share I have is in a 16-team league, which, again, when you're that deep, and some people are playing that. And if you're in a 16-team league, I think you could do worse on your bench than a guy like Taylor, especially if it's a PPR format. I think you're okay there.
I think it's totally fine in a 16-team league. Okay, so I have all three of those guys slightly ahead of Stevenson, but it sounds like that's basically the range. And interesting, by the way, with Williams, I do expect him to factor in, but I'm sort of baking that into my Gus Edwards projections, and he still comes out, right?
I'm not saying Gus Edwards is not going to be good.
No, I get it.
My whole thing is that Gus Edwards just has that little twinge of, if guys, this is an old adage, I'm going to use a baseball thing just for a moment, just for a metaphor. If relief pitchers were any good, they'd be starting pitchers.
Yeah, I get it.
If backup running backs were all that good, they'd be starting running backs. There's a reason why they don't have the job. And sometimes backups show up, and then sometimes the third string guy like a James Robinson shows up out of nowhere and has a great season. These things do happen, but typically speaking, there's a reason the depth chart exists. Sorry.
That's fine. No. Look,
this is amazing. I just stunned Dan Harris. Well, Dan Harris has nothing to say.
I love Gus Edwards. I have always loved Gus Edwards. And I think that the fact that Gus Edwards is the quote-unquote second running back on a team that runs the ball a ton and likes to split up their running back and behind J.K. Dobbins is totally fine with me. And again, I think the bottom line with Edwards is like, there was no plan for Gus Edwards to be a guy in this offense when he joined the team, right? They didn't, It's not like he was like, okay, we've got this guy. He just worked his butt off to get to a point where he was like, oh, you guys have to play me because I'm going to average more than 5 yards per carry and I'm going to be one of the highest graded running backs in PFF. So for me, I'm more excited about Edwards than most people, but I'll own it. If it goes south, I'll own it. No big deal.
I don't think it's going to go south. I just don't know if it's got quite the upside some other people might think. And let me be frank here. I was driving the Gus bus hard last year, man.
Yep.
And every waiver wire show for a week's going, pick this guy up. Please be ahead of time. And then by the time, he's like, where were you a month ago? And I was telling you to pick this guy up. Be proactive when it comes to waiver wire.
Yep.
Let's get to another situation here. Let's talk about Justin Jackson. I want to throw Larry Rountree in this too, in this conversation. Historically speaking here, when we're talking about the Chargers, they're always looking for somebody else in this backfield that's not named Austin Eckler right now. So do you have any love for Jackson, Rountree? I mean, Kelly put the ball on the ground way too much last year. I don't even want to talk about him. What are your thoughts here?
I don't really want any of them, Joe. And I think had Rountree not made the roster, I would have had a little more interest in Jackson, though not a ton because he just can't stay healthy. And he hasn't even been healthy this preseason anyway, so it's not as if we can go there. But yeah, you've got all these guys on there. Maybe one of them emerges, but my inclination is that none of them emerges, right? And then Eckler is going to be the only guy. Not that none of them will get work, but that all of them will get work enough so that when you're talking about taking the small piece of the pie and then you're dividing that small piece of the pie into three, that's just not going to be. So for me, is it possible that Jackson winds up having a lot of value this year? Sure, the Chargers do like him despite his injury concerns, but again, holding on to Rountree, and maybe that's just the injury, makes me think that I don't see it happening for any of the guys not named Austin Eckler in that backfield.
All right, let's see if we can get another one in here before I want to talk about this next guy here because Yates has talked about him a ton, and I understand the thought process here with Rashaad Penny, but I also struggle with the concept of a player who's been in the league this long, and I just haven't seen anything that really makes me feel like he's going to be fantasy worthy outside of catastrophic injury to Chris Carson, which Chris Carson's had injury issues in the past. So is Rashaad Penny a guy you have any shares of, and is this a guy that people should be looking at to stash in drafts?
Yes and yes. I have a lot of shares of Rashaad Penny, and I think that people should be trying to make sure that they draft him regardless of if they roster Chris Carson. I mean, here's the bottom line with Rashaad Penny. First of all, he's dealt with some injuries in his career, you might say that. And he had an injury again this preseason. I think it was a thigh that cost him a lot of time, but he sounds like he's back healthy right now. They declined his fifth-year option, so he's going to be a free agent after this year. So he is motivated to play well. But again, forget about the draft capital, the dumb draft capital that they used to take him. Like, that was a stupid decision at the time, regardless. Penny's talented, Joe. Like, I don't know about you. I really, really like what I see from him when he is on the field. And I think people forget, in 2019, at the end of 2019, before he suffered the injury that basically cost him all of last year too, he had essentially taken over at least half. He had a split backfield with that, with a couple of monstrous games, if not the entire thing, because he is talented. Chris Carson himself is injury prone, has yet to play a full 16-game season in his career. And he got over the fumble issues. Hopefully he doesn't rear its head again. But there was a point a couple of years ago where they were ready to bench Chris Carson because of the fumble issues, because of all that. And there is a path right now. Yes, he is an insurance policy back, but we are drafting other insurance policy backs like Alexander Madison and Tevin Pollard. So he is in that. I mean, I have him ranked. I'm looking at my rankings right now. I have him ranked one spot behind Alexander Madison.
Who's your favorite of those insurance policy running backs?
Pollard by far, actually. Yeah. I have Pollard 41st. I have Madison 49th and Rashaad Penny 50th. So that's like sort of the same range. But Pollard is just because Pollard is the guy that we have seen. But one of my favorite memories from last year, by the way, is when Zeke was randomly out for that game, whatever week that was late in the season, and Tags and I are furiously messaging each other about where to rank him. Like, it was like a 20-minute back and forth stat thing with me and Tags doing it, and then we settled on something, and Yates is doing his live stream, and he's like, I don't know what to do with it, and blah, blah. But it was one of my favorite things with Tags. But regardless, I think he's right there, though, Joe. Like, I think the upside is enormous. If anything happens to Chris Carson, I think it is unlikely, because I think Chris Carson is an outstanding back. But I think, Joe, it is within the range of possibilities that eventually Chris Carson fumbles a little bit or gets a little nicked up. Penny comes in, and he absolutely dominates and has like a big couple of games and carves out a role for himself. So for me, I'm drafting Rashaad Penny everywhere. I think he's a guy who everybody should target towards the end of their drafts, and he's basically free.
I'm with you on the Pollard thing. Pollard's the guy that I get a lot of shares of, especially because, I have my concerns at least about Zeke. It's not that he can't draft Zeke. And you know what's funny? I've seen Zeke fluctuate quite a bit in drafts. Have you noticed this lately?
I have, and what's interesting,
3 weeks ago, this was not the case, Dan Harris. I've seen him go in second rounds, and I'm not talking super flex. I'm talking like, it has been crazy.
Not that much for me. Okay,
I saw one or two where I was like, wow, I can't believe that.
So for me, he's been locked in at 5 forever. And what's funny, Joe, is I have my last draft every year, Wednesday night before the season at 8:30. I have the 5th pick. So I'm like, well, I'm getting Zeke. Like, obviously, that's my number 5 running back. I assume the top 4 are going to be the consensus top 4. And for whatever reason, I'm trying not to let, like, the group think influence the way I am. But I agree. I suddenly see him sort of slowly moving a little bit down. Not to the second round. God, I've never seen that. But
I saw one or two. There's 10-team PPRs. Okay. So you saw, like, the wide receivers go. You saw, like, the people wanted to start with Adams, Diggs, Hill instead. And I understand that. Like, lock in that wide receiver. Probably not going to get hurt as much. I get that.
Still not me, man. He's still 5 for me. I'm taking him at 5. Again, to our point about Martin and the first game, I'm going to be a little nervous in that first
Pollard's
game.
going to work more in that game, I think, that people realize. We'll see.
Well, I don't care about Pollard, more about the fact that I don't know how much ground Zeke is going to gain here without that offensive line, but it's fine. Everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
But yes, Pollard
obviously. Like the dog in the firehouse.
That my entire life is the dog with the fire going at saying this is fine. But regardless, I do think Pollard is very obviously a clear cut up. But in terms of Alexander Madison and Rashaad Penny, like, those are really the 3 guys for me, and Pollard a little bit of a cut above, as we said, who I'm targeting as insurance policy backs. Because again, JJ said it last week on it, which is correct, which is your running back philosophy should be to fill your bench with the high upside guys who can be stars if anything happens to the running back in front of him. Right. For me, that is definitely Penny.
Let's talk about another running back that is getting a lot of buzz here in the preseason and is starting to get some buzz on some fantasy benches too. And I want to know if you think Chuba Hubbard is worthy of stashing or dropping in terms of their attention in fantasy football in 2021. I've seen a lot of Hubbard all of a sudden start to pop on a lot of teams, and I can understand why. But do you think this is really the best way to use your draft capital late in the draft?
I think it's fine. I mean, we saw what happened with Mike Davis last year. And, as much as obviously Mike Davis has kind of been my dude this entire season, I was not thinking about him whatsoever last year. And he was not drafted anywhere, at all last year. I remember because I picked him up off waivers, certainly when CMC got hurt. As a rookie, it's hard for me to imagine that he's going to step in and if something happened to McCaffrey and take a giant giant, like the whole role, especially as Mike Davis did. But I think it's fine. He's well below for me the Madison Penny tier because again, I don't expect anything to happen to McCaffrey where suddenly Chuba Hubbard comes in and is just dominates the touches every touch and they rely on him like that just because he's a rookie. So fine is a very late round pick. I don't have any shares of him and I don't really feel that bad about him.
All right, let's close things out with two Jets here, Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman. So obviously, I think Michael Carter is the guy that we'd all like to be the guy in that backfield sooner than later. But it's a long season. September is going to be some sort of rotation here. Do you see any upside to stashing Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, any of those guys worthy of a roster spot for you, at least in September, especially maybe if you missed out on running back or maybe you have a couple, maybe you drafted J.K. Dobbins, right? And he got hurt on your roster. Is Tevin Coleman somebody or Ty Johnson somebody in week 1 or 2 you want to have on a roster and maybe throw in for a start?
I mean, if you drafted J.K. Dobbins and you're grasping at straws, then anybody with a pulse is fine to go. But otherwise, no. I don't know what we're going to see necessarily from this Jets backfield. Again, with LaFleur in San Francisco, the highest percentage of rush attempts that any running back had, because we know, over a season was 36%. And the average is 30%. They want to run a timeshare. Maybe Michael Carter, who's the most talented back there, breaks away from it late in the season, which is why I don't mind drafting him. But early on, I think it's just going to be a committee right now. I have no real interest in any Jets running back other than Carter, and even that, I'm thinking late in the season.
All right, let's move on to the wide receivers here, and let's start with Russell Gage, who is a player that I've drafted quite a bit. I'm happy to take Russell Gage. I understand that Russell Gage might have a cap to the ceiling, but I feel like he's not being appreciated enough. As bench depth wide receiver, I love him as a stash, Dan. Do you?
Yeah, this is what we talked about last week where I basically said not everybody has to be a home run at wide receiver, right? Your bench wide receivers do not have to be necessarily a home run. I agree with you. There's a pretty hard cap on his upside. He'll get targets and everything like that, but he is not designed to be a perimeter wide receiver. He doesn't have the separation. So I don't expect him to, wow, look at this, all these targets, they're there, blah, blah. I don't expect that. But he's the number 2 wide receiver in this offense. Right. It's worth something. I completely agree with you, Joe. He's a good guy to have. Don't start him, obviously, anywhere close to wide receiver 3. But as a bench guy, as a fill-in, if you have an injury and you need somebody to go there, it's not a home run play, but it's a singles play that you're going to be like, okay, this guy's going to get me a single. Sorry, we're all baseball today. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, why is that? Is it just because you and I are alone? All of a sudden we revert back to baseball metaphors? Is that what we're doing?
I guess. I mean,
well, the Falcons are going to throw the ball a ton, too. The defense is terrible. They're going to still throw the ball. I don't care who the new coaches and new OC and all that stuff. They're still going to be down. And that defense is still going to put him in a hole. So Russell Gage has some value, especially in the deeper leagues.
I think the only, if there's a worry about him, and the reason why I feel like I keep him down in my rankings is look, Arthur Smith, he doesn't run a bunch of 3 wide receiver sets. So if Gage really does struggle on the perimeter, I could see him losing his starting outside role, which obviously wouldn't be good for him, but it's not like they have a ton of wide receiver depth anyway. So yeah, he's a guy who, Joe, we do so many mock drafts. When we draft him, it's always yeah, okay, yep, all right, nice, comforting.
Yeah,
comforting,
exactly.
Nice,
I always feel good about it. I never go, oh no, Russell Gage. I go, okay, yeah, sure, Russell Gage.
And there are times where your team needs that. There are a lot of times where your team needs that. And
stability's a good thing.
And I think everybody wants to shoot the moon, and I think it's not necessary. So Gage, absolutely. I am taking, and again, he's somebody who we talk about how you take one of your last round picks. You want to know after week 1, is this guy going to work out? And if not, you can drop him. There is value in that, actually, and I'm sure we'll talk about a couple of those guys. Gage is not that guy. Gage is a guy who you're just I'm just drafting. He's going to be my wide receiver 4. I'm going to hang on to him, and then, if he doesn't do much week 1, it'll be fine. I'll live.
All right, let's talk about Nelson Agholor. He's another guy that kind of goes in that same range, late wide receiver. Look, Agholor outperformed anyone's expectations last year. He went on a fantastic run there, about 6 weeks, where he's just scoring touchdowns all over the place. I like him more with Mac Jones. I still don't like him as much as I like Jacoby Myers potentially in this offense. I think Agholor will have some moments, but once again, this is more of a deeper league stash for me. In a 12-team league, I still think you could do better than Agholor, but in a 14-team league, I'm okay with the stash. How about you for Agholor?
Yeah, I think I feel basically the same way you do. I mean, he's going to drop some balls, right? That's just how he rolls. He's got a 59% catch rate last year, so that's going to happen. But again, the deep targets, I think he's going to maintain that deep threat that he'll be for the Patriots. There will be a couple of games that he'll go off, but it's Myers, and then it's a long drop down to really anybody else. Agholor would be the next guy. So for me, you're in a 16-team league, great. 14-team league, very late, great. In a 12-team league, though, I just can't see it, Joe. Like last year was so unexpected. I don't think he's worth your time. But again, in a 14-team league, there will be a couple of weeks where Nelson Agholor is going to catch like a 70-yard touchdown, and you'll be elated. But for the most part, I'm ignoring.
Yeah, bye-week filler, waiver wire guy. I think that's where you're looking at Agholor. Jalen Reagor, this is another one, too, where I'm starting to change my tune. This is why it's important to not just see the stats, but to watch. I like what I've seen so far to Jalen Reagor this offseason, much more than last year. And obviously we didn't have one, but even earlier in the season last year, I just didn't like what I saw to Jalen Reagor, but we can now attribute that greatly to the offensive line, to Carson Wentz, all of that. So I'm going to kind of give him a pass here and say year 2, wide receiver, had a ton of talent, very highly regarded in the NFL draft process. So Reagor is a guy for me that's actually, I didn't have any early shares of, but a bunch of late shares in recent drafts. And I actually am curious to see how good of a start he can get off to, because some of these matchups we talk about with the Eagles early on are not that bad. So if it doesn't happen right away, I feel like he's that perfect guy where if it does, it's great. If it doesn't, you can cut him and move on, but you have nothing to lose.
Yeah, it's interesting, Joe, the way you described it, because I'm sort of the opposite. Not that I'm off him necessarily, but just more that I found myself drafting him a lot early on in the draft season, not as much lately. And that might be fantasy managers being a little more excited about him than they was.
Maybe because he was completely free at that point.
Right. And again, there were a couple one, he was terrible last year, like everybody on the Eagles was, because they were terrible. Carson Wentz was terrible. The offensive line was terrible. But Reagor didn't play well. I would admit, I was very high on Reagor. He did not play well personally. Then he failed the conditioning test early on. But again, that was something where he had a personal issue, so completely fine. And he has looked really, really good in camp. He's got kind of the guaranteed role. He's got the new coach and the new system. So he is somebody who I want to see what he looks like, especially you mentioned the early season schedule. They get Atlanta, San Francisco, Dallas, like Atlanta especially. Like, let's see what he does in week 1, right? Let's see what that looks like against Atlanta. Let's see how that goes. But with Ertz there, Joe, that's kind of something that kind of pushed down a little bit, because again, I assumed early on in the season that Ertz was probably going to be traded, and it would just be like, okay, it's going to be Goddard, it's going to be Devonta Smith, and it's going to be Reagor. With Ertz there, I think he's going to take away some targets from it. There were questions about Hurts passing. So I found myself drafting him a little less and less lately, but still not a bad guy. Let's see how it goes, especially week 1.
Dare I ask you, Emmanuel Sanders, stashing
Who?
This year? I don't know if you've heard of him. He's new to the league. He's only 47 years old.
Yeah.
But your fascination with Emmanuel Sanders is fascinating to me, Dan. And I'm not sure where it came from, but I'm loving it. I am actually find myself rooting for Emmanuel Sanders now because of how long this has gone on, and I can't believe we're here.
I like, old people who get by mostly on guile. That's kind of my jam, right?
Is that how I got this job?
So here's the deal with Emmanuel Sanders. Again, we talked about not needing to shoot the moon very quickly, because I've talked about it before. Not needing to shoot the moon. You know, I when they targeted him so much, I don't mean like the football targets. I mean, like, targeted him to sign him to their team. I think they want him. I think they see a role for him. He didn't decline nearly as much as people kind of thought. And again, even if you like the Gabriel Davis, chatter, even if you think that's going to be it, even if you think Cole Beasley is going to remain on the team and not have issues with his whole vaccination status, the Bills ran the second most 4 wide receiver sets in the league last year. Like, there will be room for Sanders. This is, again, a guy who's very much, he's a couple of spots for me, Joe, behind Russell Gage. Couple of spots. Okay, I view him very similarly. Okay, I view him as a guy who's probably going to get enough work to matter. He is never going to get enough work, never going to be a superstar to be the guy who you're like, man, I have the steal and my league winner is Emmanuel Sanders, but you don't always need that late in your draft. So yes, I have many shares of Emmanuel Sanders. I urge you to join me on the Emmanuel Sanders train. It's a kind of boring ride, but you don't hate yourself afterwards. So
we should do a show next year called Zero Shares, where we talk about the players we have 0 shares of. I have 0 shares of Emmanuel Sanders.
I imagine that almost everybody out there has 0 shares, because I probably gobbled up all the shares.
I saw it in the Discord chat. I saw Emmanuel Sanders shares on some of the screenshots of rosters, and I could only think that those were relatives of yours.
They are. And this is also it's a last round, just to be clear.
No, of course.
Like a last round pick.
We're talking about stash here.
All right, very good.
It's fine.
Very good.
I have all the Gabriel Davis, and I'm still going on that train. I can see Emmanuel Sanders being useful too, because put aside the vaccination stuff with Cole Beasley for her second anyway, and just talk about he's 32. Is he going to see 100 targets again at age 32? He's got a little bit more tread on the tires. Those guys who, work in the middle of the field take a lot of shots. Beasley's taken a lot of shots over the years. like those guys don't typically age well. So Emmanuel Sanders, I think, is a very important insurance policy because I think it's an important part of that offense. So I think he potentially hurts more Cole Beasley's status than he does necessarily Gabriel Davis, which is why I keep always pushing over to Davis, because I feel like that's the guy you're looking for in the red zone. Now, because it's become a thing now, I am rooting for Emmanuel Sanders in some weird way. Like week 1, if Emmanuel Sanders has 2 touchdowns, I cannot wait to come onto a show with you. I might just like storm into the kickoff and just be like, Dan, Emmanuel Sanders, look how good he was. I might say up to 1 in the morning.
But you realize, right? Like I can't, like there will be no victory laps on Emmanuel Sanders, even if he does really well, until the very end of the season. Because he could have 2 touchdowns in week 1, which he probably won't, but he could have 2 touchdowns in week 1. And then do nothing the rest of the season. So there will be no victory laps on Emmanuel Sanders. But I'm rooting for you. If you ever want to come on this podcast, I got your back.
Yeah, Emmanuel, we love you.
Come on up.
It's not personal. It's just about fantasy value. I remember that Sammy Watkins week 1 a couple years ago? Of course. Where all those Sammy Watkins truthers, which I hate that phrase, but all those truthers were out there in Twitter, and then you never saw him again the rest of the season. That was funny.
I'm not kidding, man. This is good. This is a good lesson for everybody. Do not go crazy over week 1.
What did I say last week? Our job is to be right.
I mentioned it. I mentioned it again. It's like 10 players to fade at their ADP. I did a video for our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasypros. Make sure you subscribe. Last year, and it was 10 players to fade at their ADP. Number 1 was Mark Andrews, who had 2 touchdowns right off the bat. And our wonderful senior video producer, Chris, was basically like, yeah, you got a little bit of hate going on right now on our YouTube channel. They are calling you mean names. And I'm like, I get it. And then again, it turned out that Mark Andrews was a very clear fade at his ADP even after that game. So don't overreact to week 1, everyone.
Don't overreact. All right, T.Y. Hilton. Is that a guy you want to stash at his age with the injury already, with the circumstance at quarterback all kind of in flux right now? I struggle here. I've seen T.Y. Hilton fall in drafts so much that it kind of hurts my soul, but I can't seem to pull the trigger, Dan. Is he a stash to you or a guy you're avoiding?
No, I mean, I have 0 shares of T.Y. Hilton. I don't ever consider drafting him whatsoever with this. I was before this injury. Like, he was a very late round pick for me, but we know he's gone at least 3 games. Sounds like he'll be back after that, but you're already down 3 games for a guy like T.Y. Hilton. He has had 0 time, really, to get acclimated with Carson Wentz. So when he comes back, it's like, hi, meet each other, try to figure out how to be a wide receiver and a quarterback. There's no reason for me to draft T.Y. Hilton. Completely off my board.
Rondale Moore, AJ Green, 2 guys of the same team here. Now, Rondale Moore, I've got some shares of late because I look at this circumstance and I go, okay, it's going to be somebody else. And at this stage in the game, I'm going to roll the dice on the kid. It's a younger person's game. That's just what I'm going to do. AJ Green has had health issues last couple of years. AJ Green is a very talented player, but like a lot of wide receivers, when you get into your 30s there, the decline starts to set in. So I'm on the Moore side, and I do like stashing him. I don't see any reason to stash AJ Green. Do you?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I mean, I have a lot of Moore. He's like a perfect late round guy. Again, we talked about it. Guys who you should know early whether or not they're going to explode. Right. And again, even if he doesn't win the slot role, I said the Bills ran the second most 4 wide receiver sets in the league. The Cardinals ran the most 4 wide receiver sets in the league. So again, they look like they were trying to get involved. With Green, it's not, Joe, out of the realm of potential outcomes that AJ Green has a good season. I mean, that the Cardinals target their wide receivers all the time, 65% last year. Again, they run 4 wide receiver sets. They paid him a decent amount, I think $8 million, stuff like that. So it's possible that Green has an okay season, but yeah, I just can't do it. Like, he's 70th on my board, so that's at the point where I'm not really looking at you whatsoever.
Yeah, I just don't like investing in players that age. It kind of comes back to T.Y. Hilton. It's like, you can't live in the past. It's very difficult, especially because if you've been playing fantasy a long time, you see that name, you have good feelings because that player won you championships, won you money, over the years. And I understand that it's very hard to kind of break those relationships over time. But if the history has taught us anything, it's to try to steer away from those players as they get to this point in their career, because more often than not, they become useless to you, unfortunately, which is very difficult. It's the last thing you want. You want bench players to be useful, either have value in your lineup or value to somebody else, because then you can make a trade and pull something off if you have a need. So that's what your bench is for. Don't forget that. Stop living in the past. All right, let's get to some quarterbacks here. Let's start with Daniel Jones. This was a player that got a lot of buzz kind of early draft season, and I don't know. I'm still keep going back to the turnovers. And would you know it, the last preseason game where we watched him, he had that great drive all the way down there and then threw a pick in the end zone, and everyone was like, yep, that's Daniel Jones. That was quintessential Daniel Jones. The moment where you could watch him go an entire, really good drive, outstanding, no Saquon on the field. He looks really good. He's throwing the football well, moving around the pocket, and then he throws a pick in the end zone. And that is what crushes you in fantasy, Dan, because you only have a finite number of opportunities to get that score, to get those fantasy points, whether it be for Jones or anybody else. And this is why I struggle with the Giants as a collective for the most part. But Daniel Jones, some people still like as a second QB. In Superflex, Dan Harris, how do you feel about Daniel Jones?
I am not comfortable starting Daniel Jones as my second QB in a Superflex format or in a 2QB league. Bottom line is this. I feel like for that second quarterback, I want either stability or I want the upside. And Daniel Jones, to me, gives you the possibility of neither. I mean, look, he rushes, okay? He had 30 rushing yards, averaged over 30 rushing yards a game last year. That's fantastic. They added Kenny Galladay. Saquon Barkley will be back. They drafted Kadarius Toney. Yay! That offensive line is abysmal. Jones's decision-making has been pretty questionable throughout. And frankly, I didn't buy him necessarily as an NFL starting caliber quarterback when he was drafted. He has done nothing to make me think that he is now, again, Daniel Jones, better at playing football than I'm at anything in my life. But for me, there's nothing intriguing for me that makes me want to draft Daniel Jones. Even as a second QB, I have him outside that range. I have him 25th.
As a third quarterback, I'm fine.
I'm out. I'm only as an eighth quarterback. If you're
eighth quarterback.
No, I'm kidding. Yes, as a third quarterback, anybody who could throw a pass in the NFL is fine. And again, he's 25th, so he's outside the range.
Right.
He'll probably provide some value with his legs, like a little bit again. But yeah, I'm glad they added Kenny Galladay. That should theoretically make a difference. And again, a healthy Saquon. But that offensive line is so bad. And when you combine that offensive line, one of the worst in the league, with a quarterback who has fumbling issues, maybe not repeatable, whatever, but also, generally speaking, has had kind of some rough decision-making moments. It's a horrible recipe. So I just can't imagine the upside. I can't imagine the stability. I'm out completely.
All right, well, I'm going to make you feel better, New York fans, because Zach Wilson I actually feel better about than I did going into the season. I had a lot of questions, and I was not bashful about those questions. He answered a lot of them for me. I feel really good about Zach Wilson right now. I still am concerned with the schedule. I keep coming back to that. I think what you saw in preseason was encouraging, but once you get out there on the field and you see what's going to happen to him with the defenses he's going to have to face on a regular basis, it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle. But as a third quarterback, I'm really good with stashing him, especially if you do miss out on that, really exciting third quarterback or late second quarterback run that's out there in Superflex right now. I'm okay with Wilson as my third guy. And he's going to play because there's no other options there.
I could live with him as a very, very low-end second quarterback in one of these leagues because, again, the biggest point, Joe, of everything that we talked about is the fact that there is nobody behind him. Okay, this is Zach Wilson's job right from the start. He's out there. I don't think you can say the same about Daniel Jones, by the way. Like, Daniel Jones doesn't matter. They could just be like, I can't do this anymore with Jones. Wilson is going to be the starter. And I agree with you. I don't understand really what optimism feels like necessarily, but I imagine it's kind of the tingling feeling that I'm getting right now when I'm thinking about my Jets and watching Wilson. He's got the arm. He can run. He's got pass catchers. They invested a lot with the offensive line. They've got Corey Davis, one of our favorites, obviously. They've got Elijah Moore. Jameson Crowder's dealing with a COVID issue, whatever, but they've got Keelan Cole, Denzel Mims. He'll have weapons, good offensive coordinator, good coaching staff. Again, with the job security, Joe, like as I'm saying, it's like the very last QB2 that you can kind of roll with. But I'd certainly prefer him to Jones because there is upside. If everything goes right, there is upside. So he's a guy who I'm willing to roll with. Again, low end at that point.
Rank these three guys for me. Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, Zach Wilson.
Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, Zach Wilson. Okay, I had Zach Wilson as first. We're talking quarterback, fantasy.
Well, yeah, we're
right?
not talking
fantasy.
Safety here. Yeah,
right.
these guys don't play
fantasy,
safety.
Fantasy right?
quarterback. Yeah, fantasy quarterback for this season.
I've
those
got
super flex people.
I've got Wilson, Jones, Daniel Jones, Mac Jones. That's how I have them ranked. The bottom line with Mac Jones is, look, I like Mac Jones actually a lot, but I think they're gonna be pretty conservative this year with the Patriots. That's just my expectation of him. So I think the upside of Daniel Jones kind of surpasses that. In that, again, I don't see the upside to be a starting caliber quarterback, but really with me, Mac Jones, it's very difficult for me to ever see him even giving you more than maybe 1, maybe 2 weeks throughout the season where he's going to be worth starting even in a 2-quarterback league. I can see Daniel Jones doing that a couple of times at least just based on his legs alone.
I have them back to back to back. Actually, my rankings. And if you want to see how I rank them, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. And our quarterback video that I did is coming out, I think, sometime today or tomorrow, where I rank them all. So teaser. That's why. Or you can just go to FantasyPros and look at my rankings too. But look, they're right there. So it's an interesting conversation. I was just curious about your take.
And again, I can let me see if I have the very quickly. Sorry to take us off. I'm looking at my projections, Joe, because that's also what I like to. Yeah, I mean, if you've got Zach Wilson and Daniel Jones and Mac Jones, the difference between them on the season, it's like between all three of them,
it's like 3 points.
It's 14 fantasy points. So I mean, when I'm sort of like, but again, this is when people are, to me, it's like Wilson has the highest ceiling by far, and Jones, to me, just based on what I've seen, has the lowest ceiling. That's why I'm going to.
All three are the better third quarterbacks. Like if you're looking for that third QB for 2 weeks, you're going to start in Superflex and make an investment in. All three, I think, are worthy of that. Yep. But if you have to start them for an extended period, you're going to be in a problem. Let's talk about deeper quarterback leagues, right? We're talking about a 14-team league where these guys are on the fringe. Let's talk about Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr. Are these quarterbacks that you want on your roster? I say yes to both of them. You just have to be patient with Kirk Cousins because September, historically, last 2 years have been dreadful for him. And then after that, he flips a switch. I don't know what happens. I guess he likes pumpkin spice lattes or something. I don't know what goes on with Kirk Cousins. But all of a sudden, he turns things around in the month of October. And then he goes on and this is true last year, and it's true of the year before. He goes on like a 10-game stretch, Dan, where he has the same numbers as Russell Wilson 2 years ago. And you're looking like, how can this be? And then it all falls apart at the end because it's Kirk Cousins. But for a stretch run, at least, Cousins is very good. And Carr, although limited yet again, I think is going to be around 4,000 yards this year. I think he's going to be somewhere around 28 touchdowns or something like that. And that's perfectly fine if you want to, even in those deeper quarterback leagues, be aggressive on Fields or Lance or Trevor Lawrence and then get one of these guys as a backup. I think you could do a lot worse.
Yeah, so I don't have either one of these guys. They're not ranked for me as a starter at quarterback in a 14-team league or anything like that. But I do think that they are both extremely, extremely serviceable options, certainly as backups. And if you, God forbid, you got stuck with them in a 14 or 16, I mean, Carr is underrated. Like from a real life perspective and a fantasy perspective, a QB 13 last year, QB 17 the year before, he's never going to hurt you. 4,100 yards, 27 touchdowns, just 9 picks last year. That's good. But again, there's no upside, right? There's no real plausible path for Derek Carr to suddenly finish as like a top 10 QB. They just don't have the wide receivers right now on that team. But I would prefer him to Cousins. Cousins last year, man, you're right. He went on that crazy stretch, especially at the end. He was the 11th QB. And overall, incredible year, 4,200 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, just 13 picks. And they bolstered the offensive line. My worry a little bit with Cousins is kind of threefold. Number one, they lost Irv Smith Jr., which I know is not like a huge, crazy deal, but it is something. Like, we liked Irv Smith. We thought he was going to be good. The defense is going to be better this year. I mean, they were abysmal last year, so Cousins had to go and throw a ton. They've got Hunter back. They added Patrick Peterson, so they've got that. And the third, Joe, is I've brought this up a couple of times. I think it's silly if we ignore it. The fact is, we know exactly what Kirk Cousins is talking about with vaccinations and stuff like that. And if we know that a player is not vaccinated, we do know that that is going to add to the risk that he's probably going to miss a game just because of what the protocol is. So for me, that knocks Cousins a little bit back. I actually have Cousins ranked as my 20th quarterback on the year because I do find myself taking Fitzpatrick, Carr, Winston, Matt Ryan, Tua over him. So that's just where I've come out on Cousins. But you can live with it.
You can't put Fitzpatrick over him. Roethlisberger, I can understand. Carr, I can understand. I can even understand Baker Mayfield to a certain extent if you want to really knock him down all the way. But I think I've got him at 14. And just so people don't think I'm completely crazy, September of 2019, Cousins threw 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, 183 passing yards per game, right? So just to give you kind of an idea, this was September 2019. For the next 2 months, Kirk Cousins threw 18 touchdowns, 1 pick with a 288 passing yards per game. Okay? Pretty significantly different.
Yes.
First 6 games of 2020, 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, 245 yards per game. Over the next 10 games, 24 touchdowns, 3 picks, 279 per game. So I know this because I do the quarterback write-ups, and that's these are things I have quick access to. But I'm just telling you, if it gets off to a bad start again and you're needful of quarterback help, don't be discouraged by a slow start by Kirk Cousins. Because you might be able to acquire him in a trade, and you might get the October pumpkin spice latte Kirk Cousins, which is far better. The foliage starts to turn. You're absolutely right about the concerns with any of the unvaccinated players because there's a risk of them missing time. But some players you could take more of a risk on than others. So
I do want to get to a point in your favor, Joe, is that, you acted like, I have him 14th. That's crazy. That is closer to our expert consensus ranking, which has him at QB 16, than I have him at QB 20. So you are much more in line of the conventional thinking. So I don't think you really even need to defend yourself with it. And again, when I started my process, I think Cousins in my initial rankings might have been QB 50 or something around there. And I have just slowly kind of, as I've dug into it, as I've looked at their defense, become more comfortable with it. And again, the vaccination status that he is so public about, given what the protocols are. And again, there's going to be people probably after this. We've already seen Adam Shaheen, who has tested positive, and he is out for the first game. This is going to be a thing this year. And it's going to be something where if you're telling me that somebody is going to probably more than likely miss at least a game, that is going to knock you down for me in my projections.
And you ain't wrong about that. And it's never defending. It's always justifying the take. Too often people have takes about certain things that they don't justify in any way. If you can find the stats to back up this justification, well, that's what it's about. And then you can actually have a reason for that. Let's talk about a couple of the tight ends too here. Zach Ertz, who we kind of mentioned earlier in the show. I want to come back around to Zach Ertz because all of a sudden Zach Ertz kind of feels like he could be useful again. And poor Dallas Goedert. Oh my goodness. Late July, Dallas Goedert looked like a really good tight end. And then everybody just kind of woke up, hit the snooze alarm and then looked over and went, hey, Zach Ertz is healthy and still on this roster and playing football. And all the Dallas Goedert shares just went poof up in smoke. So Dan Harris, is Zach Ertz somebody worth stashing?
In a deeper league, yeah. I drafted him in our, we have a FantasyPros Insiders League, obviously, Joe. 14 teams.
Do we ever. Boy, we want to draft that one.
Very, very deep benches for us to navigate. And again, with tons of sharp people because everybody just spends all their time on football. I drafted Ertz as actually a second tight end, and I stashed him with one of my last picks because I do think there's upside. You're right, Joe. Like a year ago, we were drafting the guy as a top 5 tight end, right? And now he's just a complete afterthought. So him being there, and again, he's more of the guy who, between him and Goddard, generally, historically speaking, with both of them, he's the guy who runs more routes than Goddard. Goddard stays into block a little more. So I do think it hurts Goddard, not to a crazy extent. I still have Goddard ranked as a startable tight end in 12-team leagues. But I do think that Ertz is the type of kind of random tight end. There's going to be some tight end. Remember last year, Robert Tonyan. There's going to be a tight end that kind of explodes that we're going to be really excited about. Ertz definitely could be that guy given what he's done historically. So, yeah, especially in the deeper league, I don't mind, especially if you wait on tight end and you're uncomfortable with it. Getting Ertz is kind of a backup. He could explode week 1, again, against the Falcons, and then we'll all be drafting him.
I did kind of a jerk thing this weekend, Dan. I think I should share it now because
we're
talking about deep league tight end. So I'm in that 16-team guillotine salary cap league, with some of the former Major League Baseball players I was talking about, right? So I'm in this league with these guys, and I drafted and acquired George Kittle and Kyle Pitts in this 16-team.
Whoa.
Because that's where the value was, so I just took both. And I realized after I was like, that's kind of a jerk move in a 16-team league at tight end. It was not pretty as the draft went on.
Jerk move, man. Totally fine.
I kind of feel like it was kind of a jerk move, but
I think
whatever.
You're fine.
We'll see how it goes. Then the joke was on me because they both have the same buy, so we'll see how that worked. But it's guillotine, so I figured somebody else will be out there.
That's fair. That's fair.
I'll be all right. It'll be fine. Everything's fine, just like Dan Harris. One more tight end to get to, and then we'll get to a couple questions and close things out here. Adam Trautman. Everybody was buzzing about Adam Trautman coming into the year, right? Another tight end now.
Yep.
We've come full circle, dealing with a bit of an injury now. So is Adam Trautman more appealing now in a lot of ways to stash, especially, because the bloom is off the rose a little bit? Yeah. And you get the better quarterback now with Winston.
Yeah, he was somebody who was like everybody's favorite tight end sleeper early on, and then you had Taysom Hill may start, and then you had the injury scare, and then he was completely forgotten about. He's not ranked highly for where I have him, and I prefer Ertz, but certainly like we talk about Joe, especially at tight end, because basically once you're beyond the top 12 or whatever, you're just throwing darts. But he is a guy who I'd like to see what we see, like right out of the gate. And so it's not a bad idea, especially with, like, again, in a deeper league at this point, a very deep league. Putting him on your bench, maybe he explodes week 1, then you're like, oh, look what I've got here. But there is sleeper potential. But I think at one point I probably moved him up to, like, I don't know, 15th in my tight end rankings. He's still way below that at this point. But I think he might be worth kind of a look in a deeper league just to see what happens.
All right, let's get to some of your questions. Those are the stashes. And, of course, if you've got your favorite stashes or guys that you're thinking of, make sure you hit us up with FantasyPros on social media and let us know who yours are. Let's get to the listener mailbag, and let's start on the Twitter machine with El Peyo. El Peo wants to know, today is my draft. Congratulations, El Peo.
Yay.
In the 6th round, I love this projecting. In the 6th round, should I pick Antonio Brown or Jalen Waddle? So hopefully they'll both be around there, but it's a good discussion to have. These guys are very close in terms of ranking for most people. What about you, Dan? Who would you rather, Antonio Brown or Jalen Waddle? And let's just call it half PPR because we don't have a format here.
Yeah, that's good. I think that it's a pretty simple. If it's for like your wide receiver 3 for me, which probably right around that range, I do prefer Brown. I have him projected higher. He's pretty safe. Waddle is still a lot of projecting upside, which again, as I've talked about with rookies, I get a little uncomfortable doing just because I think there are way more variables. But if you are going for like your wide receiver 4 or something and you want upside, you might as well go with the upside of Waddle. So I do have Brown ranked higher. I'd probably take him first. But if you're set at wide receiver, you want wide receiver heavy, you're going for another one, I would then pivot and go with Waddle.
All right, let's go to Joe Trevetti at Joey Trav, my people. So Joey Trevetti wants to know, Jonathan Taylor, why are so many split on what type of season he will have? The man is a machine, he says. Yeah, he's a great talent. I think people are concerned because of the Nelson injury, the Wentz injury, the Wentz COVID. I think they're just, and rightfully so, I think there's concern creeping in of, it's just questions. And I think whenever you have a player in the first round or that kind of a grade, and the more questions you start to have, the more it affects their value. Now, it could be positive. You could take advantage of that value. And it's knocked him from a place where I think preseason rankings, it was way like, he was like 6th overall. Yeah, and it's come way down since then, right?
Yeah.
So this is where he should have been in the whole time anyway, I think. I'm fine with taking Jonathan Taylor. How about you? I mean, do you have questions about him?
First of all, I think there's a whole swath of people that even before
nice vocab. Swath.
Thank you.
Well
I always try to, I joke with our people, I always try to say a word that I don't really understand, but sounds like it might be correct, and I throw it in to make myself sound smarter.
That word of the day, toilet paper, is really working out for you.
Really works. Better than my Spaceballs, the toilet paper. Okay, so I think that where we have with Taylor is that there were a lot of people, our wonderful colleague Mike Tagliere is one of these people, who were fading Jonathan Taylor even before any of the injuries, because again, what he was saying is tags also, like, we watched Taylor closely because we both were invested in him, and he did not look good for a lot of the season. Like, not just he didn't have the production, he just kind of looked like he wasn't seeing the holes. He was running into the backs of his offensive linemen. It looked weird. He exploded down the stretch with the soft matchups, of course. So tags was kind of like, well, it was a bunch of soft matchups. Marlon Mack is now going to be healthy. Why are we just assuming that Taylor is going to be this dominant force? And there is that point to it, for sure. I think that is something that fantasy managers can keep in mind when they're drafting him. But I do think, Joe, you are right that people use the excuse of the Wentz injury and the Nelson injury and everything like that to kind of push him back. For me, he's my RB10. So I also have moved him down a little bit just because I don't know. We have seen what Frank Reich likes to do. He does not like to go to a bell cow back, even if the whispers are that he's gonna. You've still got Marlon Mack. Obviously, you've still got Nyheim Hines. I remember, Joe, there were a bunch of times last year where Jordan Wilkins was the #1 waiver wire pickup last year, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, God, here he comes, because all of a sudden it was like Taylor wasn't getting the work. That's within the range of possibilities, enough to drop him out of that top tier for me, right behind, for me, Saquon Barkley.
All right, let's get 2 in here real quick.
Yep.
This first one, this is right in your alley here. This is right in your wheelhouse.
Emmanuel
J.R.
Sanders?
Duren. No, J.R. Duren wants to know, is the semantics. Why do we call it positive touchdown regression instead of touchdown progression?
Because regression, thank you, Joe. Regression is something where it goes to the average. Like, that's what regression means. So there is positive regression and negative regression. Progression is a lovely term that has a lot of good uses in regular, but it's progression doesn't mean going, regressing upwards. Regression is always to the mean either way.
I've got positive aggression, which is a totally different thing.
Towards me? Oh, no.
Not towards you. Just
right.
Generally speaking. And last one here from Santiago on Twitter wants to know who's going to be the #1 waiver wire claim after week 1. And clearly, I think it's Emmanuel Sanders, right?
No, it's not going to be Emmanuel Sanders. Ooh, this is good. A waiver wire claim. So it has to be somebody then who wasn't drafted. I'll go old school, and I'll go with Rondale Moore. I'll go with a giant.
Oh, that would be I could see that.
Yeah, well, look, the bottom line is this: he's still not being drafted in a lot of places and everything like that. So again, against the Titans, they're probably gonna need to score. If Moore is suddenly oh my God, look how they manufactured touches for Moore. Look how he ran out of the slot. This is a guy who can make a huge difference. He's gonna be highly sought after, and he still is on the on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues.
All right, we went a little long today, but that's because when Dan and I get together, that's what we do. This is what we do, Dan and I, and it's a joy. It's so fun to actually just sit down, you and me, like old times leading off, and just do an hour of football. But this is kind of our relationship anyway.
Yeah.
So we're just recording it for all of you to listen to.
It's true.
In the meantime, head over to FantasyPros.com/contest. Don't forget about that Kyler Murray football. Thanks to our friends at Pristine Auction, and sign up today for Pristine Auction. That's PRISTINE auction.com. Get $5 on us with that promo code FantasyPros. And also don't forget to download that DraftKings app now and use that code FantasyPros to get involved in a free shot to win $1 million in prizes. I like prizes. And speaking of prizes, there's no greater prize than 15 extra minutes of Dan Harris every day with the Kickoff right here on Fantasy Pros. So make sure you subscribe to the Kickoff wherever you get your podcasts, and give Dan a like too, because every time you give him a like, he gets that little burst of energy. It's a beautiful thing. And we need all the energy we can. It's been a long off season, but we are ready to rock and roll. We are ready to start week 1. We've got incredible coverage coming your way. Make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel too, Dan, right? Because we've got so much content flowing there. So much content flowing there on the main page of FantasyPros.com too. Dan, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think I will just give that plug for everything you're going to see during the season. We are going to have live streams. We're going to have waiver wire live streams on our YouTube channel. Starts at live streams. Sunday morning, we're going to be doing live streams. Get into our Discord, fantasypros.com/chat, because we are going to be doing a Discord Stages. That's essentially, as Joe can tell you, basically a live radio show where we call you up, you ask us questions. It's for our premium members. fantasypros.com/chat. There's a general channel that you can talk to everybody who's not a premium member. But go to the Getting Started channel, because everybody is always like, wait, what? Are there more? Where are all the channels? And go and link your account, your subscriber account to Fantasy Pros, and you will see all these channels. Every single day there's going to be a Discord Stages. Every weekday we've got a ton of content rolling out for you. We cannot wait to get started.
It's fun to interact. And don't forget, you can upgrade your membership, fantasypros.com/offers, in order to get like a $10 deposit on any of our, sister sites there, brother sites. I don't even know what we call them anymore. You make a deposit to play some more fantasy, and basically you get that Hall of Fame subscription for a $65 value for just $10 of an investment, and you have it for 6 months. That's the whole fantasy season. So go do it already. Dan and I are ready. That's why we talk so much. We had a whole day off yesterday. We are refreshed. We are ready. Week 1 is upon us. The content's going to be fast and furious and fantastic here at Fantasy Pros. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on. For Dan Harris, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.